The second slap of applause was still dying in the ballroom when Isadora Voss looked at me the way a bank looks at a bounced check and said the sentence that would end up carved into everyone's memory of that night before it ended mine. I'd never choose someone like you. 12 women stood in a loose crescent on the marble floor of the Calder Row ballroom, each of us in a dress that cost more than my rent, none of us breathing the way you breathe when you actually have air to spare. The Voss family called it a presentation. Everyone else in the city called it what it was, an auction where the currency was bloodline and the only thing on sale was a bond mark on somebody's throat. I had not come to be sold. I had come with a manila folder taped to the inside of my thigh under a borrowed gown, 3 years of falsified shipping manifests photographed page by page, and exactly one job: get close enough to the head of the family to put the folder in her hands without anyone else seeing it happen. Instead, a caterer with a clipboard mistook me for candidate number 9, and by the time I understood the mistake, I was already standing under the chandelier with 11 actual candidates, and the Iron Queen of Calder Row was walking the line like she was inspecting cattle at auction, and she had just stopped in front of me. Her eyes were the flat gray of a closed ledger. Her scent hit me before her voice did: black pepper and rain on hot stone. Cold enough to raise the hair on my arms in a warm room. Every candidate around me had gone soft and pliant, chins tipped up, throats bared in the old show of an omega who wants to be picked. I had not tipped my chin. I had been too busy doing the math on how fast I could reach the side door. She noticed that I hadn't bared my throat. That was, I would learn later, the whole problem. I'd never choose someone like you, she said again, quieter, like she wanted only me to hear the second half of it. Perfume that expensive on a dress that cheap. You didn't come here for a bond, you came here for a payday. The room laughed, not loudly. The kind of laugh rich people do with their eyes instead of their mouths, so it doesn't smudge their makeup. I had spent 4 years being underestimated by people with worse instincts than hers, and I had a folder taped to my thigh that would end 3 careers and possibly a marriage, and I was tired in a way that had stopped being polite around year 2. So I didn't lower my eyes the way the other candidates had. Good, I said. I didn't come here to be chosen. I came here to tell you who's been stealing from you for 3 years, and unlike anyone else in this room smiling at you tonight, I don't need your money to do it. The silence that followed had a texture. I could have cut a slice off it and served it on a plate. My name is Wren Calloway. I was 27 years old, 5 months behind on a hospital bill for my sister's spine, and up until 9 seconds earlier, I had been the most invisible person in that ballroom. I want to be honest about how I got there, because none of it started with courage. It started, like most things in my life did, with a number that didn't add up. I had been a forensic auditor once, a real one, with a badge from the state and a desk with my name on it, until I flagged a discrepancy in a client's books that turned out to belong to someone with the kind of friends who make careers disappear instead of arguing with them. After that, I did contract work no firm would put its name on, the kind that came through a lawyer named Prentice who called at 2 a.m. and paid in cash. 6 weeks before the gala, Prentice called with an address on Calder Row and a warning I didn't take seriously enough. Find out who's skimming from the Voss shipping ledgers, he said. Do not, under any circumstances, be seen doing it. I had been seen doing it. I had been seen doing it by the one woman in the city with the power to make sure I never did anything again. 2 guards had my elbows before the laughter fully died. Isadora Voss lifted one hand, and they let go like her fingers were a switch on their spines. Bring her to my study, she said. Alone. The other candidates were already being herded toward the champagne, already forgetting me, already rehearsing which version of the story they'd tell first. I walked out of that ballroom on my own feet, folder still taped to my thigh, heart going hard enough that I was sure the whole house could hear it, and I understood. The way you understand a fall a half second after your foot has already left the stair, that whatever I thought this night was going to be, it wasn't that anymore. The study smelled like cedar bookshelves and the ghost of a cigar nobody in the room actually smoked. Isadora Voss stood behind a desk the size of a rowboat, and up close, without the crowd to perform for. Something in her face had gone very still and very tired, the particular tiredness of someone who has been the strongest person in every room she's entered for a decade and has stopped expecting that to change. "Sit," she said. "I'll stand." Something moved at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile, a smile's rough draft. "Say it again," she said. The part about stealing, I peeled the tape off my thigh in front of her, which was possibly the least romantic gesture in the history of the species, and set the folder on the rowboat desk. Manifest 441 lists 200 crates leaving your Bellport warehouse in March. The insurance filing lists 170. Someone's selling the other 30 out the back door and pocketing both payouts. It's been happening since October of 3 years ago. I have the dates. I have the routing numbers. I have a signature that doesn't match the one on file for your dock supervisor. She didn't touch the folder. She watched me instead, the way you'd watch weather deciding whether to become a storm. Prentice sent you. Prentice doesn't know I'm not still at the gala being handed a glass of champagne and a polite excuse to leave. I improvised. You improvised into my mate presentation. A clipboard improvised me into your mate presentation. I was aiming for the side door and a quiet handoff. You're the one who stopped the line to insult my perfume. For a moment, I thought I'd said too much. Then Isadora Voss laughed. One short exhale through her nose, gone as fast as it came, like she'd caught herself doing something illegal. "What's your name?" "Wren Calloway." "Wren Calloway," she said, testing the shape of it, and something about the way she said it made my scent do something traitorous and warm in a room where I badly wanted to smell like nothing at all. "You understand what you've just handed me. A federal case, if you take it to the wrong people. A family problem, if you keep it in-house. Either way, someone under your roof has been bleeding you for 3 years and letting your candidates take the blame when the books look thin. And you found this working for a lawyer who pays you in an envelope. I found this because numbers don't lie even when everyone standing next to them do." She came around the desk. Up close her scent thickened, cold stone gone warmer at the edges, the way weather changes right before it breaks into something else entirely. She didn't touch me. She looked at my hands instead. I hadn't realized until then that they were shaking, folder empty now, useless at my sides. "You're not what I expected to find under that dress," she said. "Nobody ever is." The rough draft smile came back, a little more finished this time. "Cole," she said, not raising her voice, and the door opened so fast I understood the lieutenant had been standing on the other side of it the entire time. A broad-shouldered woman with a scar through one eyebrow and the flat patience of someone who has cleaned up after every disaster this family has ever produced, looked from Isadora to me and back, already doing math of her own. "She's not a candidate," Isadora said. "She's under my protection until I say otherwise. Get her out of that dress and into something that isn't taped to her leg. And put her in the East guest wing." "Copy that," Cole said, in the tone of someone who has learned not to ask. I should have argued. 6 hours earlier I would have. But the folder was out of my hands, the worst of the danger already done, and something in Isadora Voss's flat gray eyes had shifted from inspection to something closer to interest, the kind of interest that made my chest go tight in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Why?" I said, Before Cole could steer me out, are you protecting the woman you just told an entire ballroom you'd never choose? Isadora looked at me for a long moment, whether deciding again. Because, she said, you're the only person in this house tonight who told me the truth. In my experience, Miss Calloway, that's rarer than loyalty. It's certainly rarer than love. The East Guest Wing had its own fireplace, its own bathroom bigger than my studio apartment, and a window that looked out over docks I'd only ever seen from the wrong side of a chain-link fence. Cole dropped a garment bag on the bed like it personally offended her and told me dinner would be sent up, that I wasn't to leave the wing without an escort, and that if I tried anything cute involving windows, she would personally enjoy explaining to me why that was a bad idea. Am I a prisoner, I asked, or a guest? Tonight, Cole said. You're a headache. Ask me again tomorrow. Dinner arrived at 8, carried by a woman introduced as Mrs. Okafor, the estate's housekeeper for going on 20 years, who set the tray down and looked at me with an expression I couldn't place until I understood it was pity, warm and unhurried. Cinnamon toast, she said, nodding at a small plate tucked beside the actual meal. The boss said you'd had a long night, said something sweet might help. I hadn't told anyone in this house that burnt butter cinnamon toast was the only thing my mother ever made that came out right, the dish I'd mentioned once, in passing, to a lawyer's assistant filling out an intake form 6 weeks earlier. A detail I'd forgotten the second I said it. Isadora Voss had not forgotten it. That single plate of toast did more to unsettle me than the guards, the gun cabinet I'd glimpsed through an open door, or the fact that I was currently sleeping under the roof of a woman an entire city called a queen and meant it as a warning. I ate the toast first. The East Wing came with a schedule I hadn't agreed to and a wardrobe that made my 3 work blouses look like a joke someone had played on me. By the second morning, I understood the tour I was being given wasn't hospitality so much as a slow unveiling of exactly how far outside my depth I'd landed, marble hallways that swallowed footsteps, a library with a ladder on brass rails, a kitchen staff of 6 for a household of maybe 15 people, and cousins, so many cousins, all of them beautifully dressed, all of them watching me the way you watch a stray dog that's wandered into a dinner party. You're the accountant, said one of them, a sharp-jawed woman named Petra, who I would come to learn was Isadora's second cousin and self-appointed morale officer for the family's collective disdain. The one from the presentation, the one she embarrassed on purpose. She embarrassed me by accident, I said. I embarrassed her on purpose. There's a difference. Petra's mouth thinned. Somewhere behind her, Cole made a sound that might have been a laugh disguised as a cough. The friction wasn't only from the cousins. It was in the small daily arithmetic of being someone who had grown up doing her own laundry in a machine that ate quarters, now standing in a closet bigger than that laundromat, trying to figure out which fork belonged to which course at a breakfast nobody had asked me to attend, but everybody expected me at. Isadora found me there on the 3rd morning, holding 2 forks like they were live wires, the smaller one, she said, without looking up from the report she was reading. For anything before the meat comes. Thank you. You slept. It wasn't a question, but I answered it like one. Eventually, your cousin Petra has strong opinions about accountants. My cousin Petra has strong opinions about anyone who isn't her. Isadora set the report down. In daylight, her eyes weren't as flat as they'd looked in the ballroom. There was a ring of something darker at the edge of the gray, storm-colored, the kind of detail you only notice when you're standing close enough to be dangerous to yourself. The ledger you brought me. I had my own people verify it overnight. And you were right about the crates. You were right about the routing numbers. You were wrong about one thing. My stomach dropped the particular half-inch it drops when you've done the math correctly, and reality still finds a way to surprise you. What did I miss? The signature. Isidora's voice went very quiet, the way weather goes quiet right before it turns. It isn't the dock supervisors. It's my consiglieres. Dominic Reyes has been running this since before my mother died. Possibly, she said, and something in her jaw tightened like a fist closing. Possibly because of it. I set the forks down. You think he had something to do with her death? I think, Isadora said, that for 11 years I have called that man family, and for 3 of those years he has been stealing from the empire my mother bled to build, and I would very much like you to tell me I'm wrong. I couldn't tell her that. The numbers didn't lie even when everyone standing next to them did, and Dominic Reyes's signature, once I compared it against 6 years of his real one, told its own quiet story better than any confession could have. That afternoon, Isadora found me in the library, technically off limits without an escort, technically caught. Instead of calling for Cole, she crossed the room, pulled a second chair up beside mine, and read over my shoulder in a silence that stretched long enough for her scent to fill the small space between us. Cold stone gone warm at the edges again. You could leave, she said finally. Prentice would take you back. This isn't your fight. You made it my fight the second you had your guards drag me out of a ballroom by the elbows. I could still let you go. I looked at her, close enough now to see the faint shadow of exhaustion she covered with makeup and posture, and 11 years of never once looking like she needed anyone. Could you, I said, or do you just want to hear me say I'm staying? Her hand, resting on the table between us, moved half an inch closer to mine. Stopped. Careful, Miss Calloway, you started it. In a ballroom, in front of 11 strangers and a string quartet. I was wrong, she said, and it cost her something to say it. I could see the cost in the set of her shoulders. About what kind of woman you were. I know, I said. Everyone always is. She didn't move her hand the rest of the way. Not yet. But she didn't move it back either, and for the length of one long afternoon in a library that smelled like old paper and rain-struck stone, that felt like enough. The message came 4 days later, slid under my door in a plain envelope with no name on it, 3 photographs of me leaving Prentice's office weeks before the presentation, and a single line of type. Everyone will know what you really are. I brought it straight to Isadora, and I watched her face do the thing I was starting to recognize as her version of fear, a stillness so total it looked like calm to anyone who hadn't learned to read her yet. Dominic, she said. You don't know that. I know exactly what this is. It's a warning, and it's badly aimed, because it assumes I'd care that you worked for Prentice before you worked for me. Her jaw tightened. It's aimed at the family council. If they think you're a plant, a spy sent by a rival to embarrass me, they'll demand I hand you over for questioning. Council questioning, in this family, is not gentle. So hand me over. Let me answer their questions. I have receipts. Isadora, I have 3 years of his handwriting. You have 3 years of his handwriting and no proof he sent this envelope, and a room full of people who have wanted an excuse to distrust me since the day I inherited this seat instead of one of them. She said it flatly, an accountant's own kind of honesty, and for the first time I understood that being the most feared woman in the city didn't mean she got to skip the parts where she was afraid. I'm not handing you over. Then what? Then I stand in front of the council tomorrow and I tell them you're under my protection, full stop. No explanation, because explaining yourself is the first step toward losing. She looked at me, storm ring eyes steady, even though her hands, I noticed, were not quite steady at all. And you stay in this house, where I can see you, until I find out exactly how far Dominic Reyes is willing to go. That night, someone put a brick through the windshield of Prentice's car 3 blocks from his office with a note inside that named me by name. Isadora told me herself, at midnight, standing in the doorway of my room in a robe, with her hair down for the first time since I'd met her, looking less like a queen and more like a woman who hadn't slept properly in 11 years and had just run out of places to put the fear. "You're not safe out there," she said. "You're not entirely safe in here either. I need you to understand that before this goes any further. I understood that the moment I stood in your ballroom holding stolen paperwork under a rented dress. That's not what I mean." She stepped into the room, and her scent came with her. Cold stone warmed at the edges into something closer to a hearth than a storm. "I mean, I would like, very much, for this to go further, and I need you to tell me if that's something you want, because I have spent 11 years taking what I want without asking, and I find I don't want to do that with you." My pulse did something complicated. "Ask, then, may I touch you?" Yes, her hand came up slow, the back of 2 fingers along my jaw, light enough that I could have stepped back at any point and she would have let me. I didn't step back. "Tell me to stop," she said, "and I will. Don't stop." The kiss, when it came, tasted like the whole week distilled into one moment, fear and relief, and something warmer underneath both of them, her mouth careful even when her hands weren't, my fingers curling into the lapel of her robe like I could hold the entire storm still if I just gripped hard enough. When we broke apart, she pressed her forehead to mine, breathing like she'd been running. "That should not have felt like coming home," she said. It did anyway. 3 days after Dominic's brick went through Prentice's windshield, the lockdown began in earnest. Perimeter doubled, guests turned away. Every door in the house keyed to a code only Cole and Isadora carried. It was during that lockdown, trapped indoors with nothing but each other and the slow tick of a house holding its breath, that I finally asked Isadora the question I'd been circling since the library. "Why does everyone call you the Iron Queen? Not the boss, not the head of the family. Iron Queen, like it's a title from a story." She was quiet long enough that I thought she wouldn't answer. Then she rolled up her sleeve, and I saw for the first time the old burn scar that ran from her wrist to her elbow, pale and puckered with age. "My mother built this family out of nothing," she said. She used to say control was the only inheritance worth passing down, because love gets people killed and control keeps them alive. She said it to me the week before someone poured gasoline through the mail slot of our old house and lit a match. I was 14. I pulled her out through a window that took most of the skin off this arm, and she still died 3 days later in a hospital bed, telling me not to cry in front of the staff, because crying was weakness, and weakness was how we'd ended up burning in the first place. I reached over and put my hand flat against the scar, and she let me, which told me more than the story had. "So I built iron," she said. Because it was the only thing she left me that I knew how to use. And I have been so cold for so long that I forgot control and safety were never the same thing. My mother thought love made you weak. I've spent 11 years finding out that being alone doesn't make you strong. It just makes you cold and calls it strength. I told her about my father then, the debt he took on for a business that failed, the men he owed money to when he died. The way I'd spent my 20s paying off a dead man's mistakes one paycheck at a time while my sister Junie's spine slowly curved past the point outpatient treatment could fix. I told her about the surgery bill, the one Prentice's cash payments were actually meant for. The reason I'd taped a folder to my thigh and walked into a Mafia gala instead of walking away from a job that had already gotten dangerous. "You didn't do it for money," Isadora said. "You did it for her. I did it because someone had to, and I was the only one with the skill and the desperation to make it worth the risk." That's the same thing I've done every day for 11 years, she said, except I called it duty instead of love, because duty sounded less like something that could be taken from me. She looked at me, and something in her face had gone unguarded in a way I hadn't seen since the ballroom. I don't want to call this duty. Then don't. Ren, my name in her mouth, still did something to my chest that I hadn't built up any resistance to. I think I am dangerously close to choosing exactly the someone I said I'd never choose. Took you long enough. The warmth of that afternoon didn't survive the week. Dominic Reyes struck back the way cornered men, with resources always do, not with a knife, but with a phone call to the family council, claiming Ren Calloway had been feeding financial records to a rival syndicate for months, complete with a doctored bank transfer in my name, complete with a photograph of me and Prentice taken at an angle that made an ordinary meeting look like a conspiracy. I found out about the council meeting from Petra, who took a visible pleasure in delivering the news. They're voting in an hour, she said, on whether to hand you over to the council's own people for questioning. Isadora can't stop a full council vote. Not even her. I went looking for Isadora and found her instead standing outside the council chamber, mask fully back in place, the warmth of the last 2 weeks folded away somewhere I couldn't reach. I need you to go to the East Wing, she said, not looking at me. Now, Cole will take you. You're going to let them vote. I'm going to buy time. There's a difference. Her voice was flat, controlled, the voice from the ballroom. If I fight this publicly right now, with the evidence Dominic's fabricated, I lose the council's confidence and I lose the ability to protect either of us. I need to be smarter than angry. I need you to trust me. Trust you to what? Hand me over. Trust me, she said, finally meeting my eyes, and for 1 second the mask cracked enough to show the fear underneath it, to come back for you. Cole's grip on my arm was gentle. Her face was not. Move, she said, and I moved, because the alternative was making Isadora's impossible math even harder, and because some small treacherous part of me still believed she meant what she'd said. I did not believe it for very long. Within the hour, 2 of the council's own security men came for me instead of Cole, flashing a signed authorization with Isadora's name on it, and no matter how loudly I told them the signature didn't match, I would know. I told them, I know every signature in this house better than my own. They put me in a car with blacked-out windows and drove me somewhere with no light and no clock, and no way of counting the hours except the growing certainty in my chest that the last 2 weeks had been exactly the kind of story I should have known better than to believe. The room they put me in had 1 window painted shut and a single working light bulb that buzzed at a pitch I could feel in my teeth. I counted the seconds because it was the only thing I had left to do with my hands, and somewhere around 11,000 of them, the door opened. And it was not Isadora. It was Dominic Reyes, smiling the calm, unhurried smile of a man who believes the math has finally worked out in his favor. You should have taken the money when Prentice offered it, he said, and disappeared like every other little accountant he's used and burned. Instead, you decided to fall for a woman who was never going to choose you over her family's survival. Iron Queen, indeed. Iron doesn't bend for anyone, Miss Calloway, not even for someone she likes the smell of. She'll find the discrepancy in whatever cover story you've built, I said. She always does. It's the one thing about her I never had to guess at. By the time she finds anything, Dominic said, you'll be a name in a shipping manifest yourself. Crate 442. Bellport dock, low tide. He straightened his cuffs, unhurried, a man closing out a ledger, nothing personal, just numbers, the way you like them. He left the light buzzing and the door locked, and for the first time since the ballroom, I let myself believe the worst image I could construct, that Isadora Voss had chosen her empire the way her mother had raised her to, and that I was about to become the kind of loss a queen writes off as the cost of doing business. I did not stay in that room out of hope. I stayed because Prentice had taught me exactly one useful thing about surviving men like Dominic Reyes. They always leave a receipt. I found mine taped under the room's single table, an old shipping tag with a routing code I recognized instantly, because I had spent 3 weeks memorizing every number that man had ever put his real signature to. It placed his last 4 transfers through a freight company 2 docks down from Bellport, one he'd been careless enough to still be using. I had no phone, no folder, no proof anyone would believe. What I had was a working knowledge of a lock mechanism from a summer job I'd taken at 19 and never mentioned to anyone in this house, because nobody had ever asked what an invisible woman does to survive when the numbers stop adding up in her favor. It took me 40 minutes and 3 broken fingernails to get the door open. It took Priya, my roommate, 6 rings to answer her phone from the payphone, 2 blocks from wherever they'd stashed me, and 11 words to set the second half of the plan in motion. "It's Ren. I need you to call Cole." Now, Cole found me before Dominic's men did, headlights cutting through an alley at a speed that told me exactly how the last few hours had gone at Calder Row. Isadora was in the passenger seat before the car had fully stopped, out the door and across the alley with a speed I hadn't known her body could produce, and when she reached me, her hands went to my face like she was checking I was real. "I never signed that authorization," she said before I could speak. "I found the forgery an hour after you were taken. I have spent every minute since then tearing this city apart looking for you." "I know," I said, and I did, because her scent had gone sharp with something that wasn't anger. Something closer to grief interrupted mid-collapse. I found his routing numbers, the freight company 2 docks down. "It's the proof, Isadora. It's everything." "Later," she said. "Right now, we get you out of here. We did not get out of there cleanly." Dominic's men found the alley 8 minutes too soon, and the exchange that followed was fast and ugly in the way real violence always is. Nothing like the choreography I'd have imagined, just noise and shouting and Isadora placing herself between me and a raised gun with a speed that left no room for me to argue about who was protecting whom. The bullet meant for me caught her instead, along the same forearm that already carried her mother's old burn scar. And she didn't so much as flinch until the men were down and Cole had Dominic himself on his knees with a gun to the back of his skull. "Do it," Dominic said, almost gently, like he expected nothing less. "Iron doesn't hesitate. Isn't that the family motto?" Isadora's finger was steady on the trigger guard. I could see, in the set of her jaw, exactly how close she was to becoming the thing her mother's doctrine had always threatened to make her. "Isadora," my voice came out steadier than I felt. "Don't, not like this, not for me." She looked at me, arm bleeding, mask cracked wide open, and something in her face broke and reassembled all at once. She lowered the gun. "Take him to the council," she said to Cole, "alive, with the routing numbers. Let the family see exactly what he is before I decide what to do with what's left of him." The council chamber at Calder Row had never, in 11 years, seen a woman walk in bleeding through a torn sleeve and set a shipping ledger on the table like a verdict already rendered. Isadora didn't sit. She stood at the head of the long table, my folder open in front of 30 of the most powerful people in the family, and let me do what I did best. I walked them through it number by number, the crates, the routing codes, the signature comparisons, the freight company 2 docks down, the doctored bank transfer built to frame me, All of it laid out with the same flat, patient certainty I'd once used to explain fraud to state auditors who didn't want to believe a client they trusted was capable of it. Petra, to her credit, went pale somewhere around the fourth exhibit and didn't say a single sneering word for the rest of the meeting. Dominic Reyes, on his knees at the foot of the table under Cole's watch, tried twice to interrupt and was silenced both times by council members who had, an hour earlier, been ready to hand me over to him. 3 years, Isadora said, when I'd finished, her voice carrying to every corner of the room without needing to rise. 3 years he stole from this family while calling himself loyal to it. He forged council authorizations, he orchestrated the kidnapping of a woman under my direct protection, and he did all of it while telling anyone who'd listen that I was too soft to lead because I let an outsider into this house. She let the silence hold a beat before it broke. I was not too soft. I was patient. There's a difference. And tonight, it cost him everything. The vote to strip Dominic Reyes of every title, holding, and protection the family had ever extended him took 4 minutes. His arrest, on evidence that would satisfy considerably less forgiving authorities than a family council, took considerably longer, and I did not feel sorry for a single hour of it. When the chamber finally emptied, Isadora turned to me in front of the last of the lingering council elders, in front of Cole, in front of Petra, who for once had nothing clever to say. I told a room full of people I would never choose someone like you, Isadora said, loud enough to carry. I was wrong about what kind of woman was standing in front of me. I would choose someone like you every single time, Ren Calloway. I choose you now, in front of everyone who heard me say otherwise. Ask me properly then, I said, since you're so fond of asking. May I claim you, she said, low now, just for me. Though the room had gone quiet enough that I doubted anyone missed it. Bond and bite and all of it. Tell me to stop, and I will, even now. Even here. Don't stop, I said, and bared my throat in front of the family that had once watched me stand accused at the far end of that same table, and this time nobody laughed. The bite came gentle, deliberate, exactly the kind of restraint I'd learned to expect from a woman who had spent her whole life mistaking control for the opposite of love and was only now discovering they could be the same act. Pointed in a kinder direction. The bond settled into place like something clicking shut after years of hanging open, and for the first time in longer than I could count, my chest didn't feel like it was bracing for a blow. 6 months later, the wedding took place on the docks at Calder Row, of all places, because Isadora said she wanted to marry me somewhere the family had once nearly burned to the ground and rebuild the memory into something better. Junie stood at the front row in a wheelchair she was, by then, only using for long days, her surgery long since paid for by a woman who'd insisted, without asking, that some debts existed to be settled rather than carried. Priya cried through the entire ceremony and blamed it loudly on the wind. Mrs. Okafor served cinnamon toast at the reception, on a silver tray, next to the actual cake, because some traditions get promoted rather than replaced. Cole gave the toast, gruff as ever, glass raised at an audience that had once doubted every choice her boss made. In 15 years working this family, she said, I have never once seen Isadora Voss wait for anyone. She waits for this one, every time. If that isn't proof enough for the rest of you, I don't know what is. Petra, to everyone's mild shock, cried harder than Priya did. Dominic Reyes served 11 years for what the courts could prove, and the family made certain he'd never again hold anything worth stealing. The freight company was seized and sold, its proceeds split between the family's legitimate holdings and a scholarship fund Isadora insisted on naming, without irony, for accountants who ask too many questions. Isadora proposed properly the night after the trial ended, on one knee on the same library floor where she'd once asked permission to touch my jaw, a small box in her palm and my father's old fountain pen, repaired and refilled, resting beside it, because she had noticed months earlier that I still carried the cracked one everywhere and had quietly had it fixed without ever mentioning it until exactly the moment it would matter most. I signed our marriage certificate with that pen. The nib still catches, very slightly, on the downstroke of a W in a way that has come to feel less like a flaw and more like a signature nobody else could forge. On our first anniversary, we drove 4 hours to a lighthouse I'd once mentioned wanting to see, in an offhand comment to a lawyer's intake form that I'd forgotten, and Isadora, somehow, never had. We stood at the rail as the sun came up gold over gray water, her arm around my waist, the old burn scar warm against my hip, both of us finally, entirely, unhurried. I think often about the woman I was in that ballroom, folder taped to her thigh, certain that being seen clearly by anyone was a danger to be avoided, rather than a gift to be received. I think about the sentence that was supposed to end me and became, instead, the first true thing anyone in that house ever said to me, however badly it was meant. Being overlooked for long enough teaches you to survive quietly. It does not teach you that someone, eventually, might look twice, and then look until looking becomes something closer to home. Isadora still says the old words sometimes, low against my hair on the mornings she wakes before I do, not as an insult now, but as its opposite, worn soft with repetition until the sting is gone entirely, and only the truth underneath it remains. I would choose someone like you every single time. The end.